For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julian Ridge. I'm one of the regional representatives for the Transport Planning Society, along with Imogen, who's sitting there, and David, sitting there. So before we get started, we're obviously very grateful for Arup for letting us use this space. It's a wonderful space for doing these kinds of events. Tim Pike from Arup is just going to say a word or two about housekeeping.
Yeah, so nothing in particular. Yeah, so yeah, welcome to Arup firstly, particularly if you haven't been a visitor to us before. No fire drills or anything planned. So if the alarm goes off, we will need to leave the building. Fire escapes are in the lift core. So there's one where everybody came in, and there is another one just through the kitchen that way. Toilets are also by the lifts, so closest is back out where you came in. And the kitchen's here. Any other questions, please ask. If not, as I say, yeah, welcome to Arup, and look forward to listening to the talk. Back to you.
Thank you, Tim. So this event is one of several events taking place across the UK for Transport Planning Day, which was on Monday. And the subject this year for Transport Planning Day is the integration imperative. How we can make a reality of connecting policy, places and people. And who better really to speak about that than our speaker, Andrew Bradley, who is the Sustainable Travel Lead for the NHS. Obviously, everyone interacts with the NHS. We all have some kind of relationship with it. It is Europe's largest employer. It generates 3.5% of all the trips in the UK. It has a huge vehicle fleet of its own. Someone once said, and I can't remember who it was despite looking it up, that it is the nearest thing we have in Britain to a national religion. So to talk a little bit about Andrew, he started his career on the buses in London, worked for Surrey County Council. I worked alongside him during his decade-long stint as the Sustainable Transport Manager in York. Since then, he's had a period at West Yorkshire Combined Authority before joining NHS England. Anyway, now over to Andrew, who will tell us all about what the NHS are up to. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Yes, and hopefully people online can hear me as well. So I'm really delighted to be here tonight, and thank you so much for inviting me, Imogen and Julian. Thank you very much for that introduction. So I'll just quickly talk about what we're going to talk about. So in the NHS, we're going to talk about what's the challenge. We're going to talk about the strategic approach to our response. We're going to talk a bit about work streams and results, and we're going to talk about the way forward. But I don't want to avoid the elephant in the room. So if you've read the news today or seen the news today, you'll be aware that the NHS England abolition moves forward one stage with the announcement of the Treasury funding voluntary redundancy. And that obviously is an issue for a lot of us, but when has the world ever been settled? I ask. It hasn't, and we will continue. And there was another article that caught my eye today in the media, and that was an opinion poll which talked specifically about British younger and older people, so not just older people, who were looking to the past with increased fondness, more so than they had in previous years, looking for something that had perhaps been lost, something that was there mythically in the past, but that we could never get back. And the reality is sometimes when we look at Call the Midwife and we see the chirpy, cheerful midwives on their bicycles and the sun is shining and their makeup is perfect and everything's wonderful and they're in sync, we do wonder whether actually things were better at some point in the past. But the reality is we have to look at both the present and we need to look at the future. And that's what the government's 10-year plan for the NHS is trying to do at the moment. And in the transport space, there's a lot to do, isn't there? Look at this. By the way, just in case you don't know what that is, that's a cycle shed that's been locked up because of building works on a hospital. It was supposed to be locked up for a few weeks, but the weeks turned into months. It's a real-time display. Great that they put it in, but it's not working. That's brilliant. That's outside a hospital near you, no doubt. And that's a cycle shed that was beautifully put in, but the access fob on it is broken, and it's been broken for 3 months. And that's outside a hospital with one of the worst examples of a shared use cycle and footway combined with bus stop that I think I've ever seen in my life. So why it's outside a hospital, you may well ask. Deliberately, I've picked a load of things that look terrible here. That's outside the main entrance to a hospital and just shows you why it can be quite challenging at times. If you can't park on the road, park on the pavement. Why not? So, why was I recruited to the NHS 3.5 years ago? And indeed, why was the National Travel and Transport Team created at that point? What is the intention of our work? Well, as Julian pointed out, we have 1.5 million staff across the NHS. We're the largest employer in the UK. And let's be honest, hospitals and other healthcare settings are a key destination for a lot of people. In fact, for all of us at one point or another. They may be a distress purchase, but they are places that we all need to go to. And as Julian pointed out, 3.5% of traffic relates to NHS business one way or another. And there's another reason, because in 2020, the NHS became the first national healthcare system to publish a plan to reach net zero carbon emissions, delivering a net zero NHS. And a lot has been said about that since, about whether it's right or whether it's not right. But the reality is it's baked into an Act of Parliament, so continue to deliver that, we will do. And as you can see, the bullet point at the bottom, we have a legal duty to meet the targets in the Health and Care Act. And so why does that pertain to transport? Well, the reason it pertains to transport really, and I've circled them here for your benefit, and if you can't see it, apologies, but you've got NHS fleet and leased vehicles in the Scope 1 emissions, business travel here, freight transport here, staff commuting, and in terms of what we committed to do back in 2020, we included patient and visitor travel as well. So there's a lot for us to do, and we're still going on with it today with the ambition of becoming net zero for the things we can control by 2040 and for the things we can influence, which includes that patient and visitor travel by 2045. And just to give you a little bit more information, this is a broad pie chart showing how travel and transport fits into the bigger picture. Because as you can imagine, the NHS is massive. Just take a step back and think about a hospital and all of the things that are going on in the hospital and all of the emissions that will be coming from all sorts of things that we are doing. The buildings, just for a start. But what is interesting is that you can see here, roughly 14% of the emissions from the NHS pertain to travel and transport, which is still a meaty chunk for us to go at and something that shouldn't be ignored. So back in 2023, almost 2 years ago now, we published our net zero travel and transport strategy. And There are several things that I just want to pick up on this, and the remainder of my talk will be based on looking at each of those. So first of all, by 2026, that's by December of next year, NHS organisations will have delivered a sustainable travel strategy, which will be incorporated into their green plans. Secondly, by 2033, we'll have increased uptake of active travel, public and shared transport, and with zero emission vehicles, we will reduce staff commuting emissions by 50%. And then thirdly, sorry, these are in the wrong order, by 2027, all new vehicles owned or leased by the NHS will be zero emission, excluding ambulances. And it's that piece that I just want to address first. So this is to give you an indication or an idea of what our fleet composition looks like as of 23-24. And what you can see is that actually a significant proportion is vehicles with under 8 seats, but they're passenger vehicles. And less than 1.5% of our vehicles are larger than 3.5 tons. So relatively small in comparison to some other fleets elsewhere. But what you can also see from this is that we've got a total fleet of 11,200 vehicles. That's the second largest fleet in the country after Royal Mail, by the way. But what you can see also is if you look at vehicles per trust, and apologies for anybody who doesn't understand the terminology or is struggling with what a trust means. A trust is basically an organisation that is looking after one or more hospitals in a local area. The median number of vehicles per trust is actually pretty low, 25. And you can see that even at the 75th percentile, it's about 70 vehicles per organisation. Half of trusts have 25 or fewer vehicles, and only 25% of trusts have more than 70 vehicles. And of those vehicles, 70% of hospital fleet vehicles are leased, and those leases tend to be quite short. And what that means is that actually in terms of churn or turnover, if you think back to that 2027 target that I put in before, that's for new vehicles, by the way. Actually, over a period of years, you can see how relatively quickly we can get to a position where our fleet will be near enough 100% zero emission. But it's still a challenge. And you can see that actually this is showing you a percentage of low emission vehicles in the fleet, ultra low emission vehicles and zero emission vehicles in the fleet. And you can see that as of 2023-24, we were at 10%. But you can see that actually it's ratcheting up 10% each year. And that is only accelerating. And sorry, on this side, this is showing you the non-emergency fleet vehicles because actually they are easier to address than your ambulance vehicles, which obviously, particularly when you're thinking about a full-size double crew ambulance, we call them DCAs in the trade, they are more difficult to convert to EV because they're not off the shelf. Over 1 in 6 non-emergency vehicles in the NHS are now fully electric, with another 20% which are now hybrid. This is a scheme that we're working on at the moment. £8 million of funding is secured from the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles. And this is specifically to target the fact that hospitals are struggling with their charging point infrastructure for their own fleet, not for patients to come and use it as a petrol station or equivalent of petrol station, but for their own fleet and to charge them. But as you can see, we're making great strides to increase the number of charging points that are available within the hospital confines. And we are delivering these at 52 hospital trusts, which is about a quarter of the total. So progress is being made. We've got more funding coming online, and that will deliver yet more electric vehicles. But when Mr. and Mrs. Miggins take their journey to the hospital, as one of our audience members told me before I started this presentation, are they thinking about what the fleet EV charge points look like? No, they are not. What are they thinking about, Andrew? I hear you ask. Well, there's only one word on anybody's mind, and that is parking. And don't we love a bit of parking in the NHS, as I'm sure anybody who's ever visited a hospital does too. What we've done is, sorry, I'll just make one more comment on that. 2 years ago, we undertook a study of parking at hospitals. And what we identified in this study of various hospitals up and down the country, all of different orders of magnitude, was that over 60% of the parking at hospitals was given over to staff. So when you're going for your appointment, just have that in the back of your mind that over 60% of the parking on a hospital site is given over to staff. Rightly or wrongly, that is what the evidence shows us. So actually targeting how staff get to work is really important, and trying to make inroads to see if we can change that. These are figures from our People Pulse survey that we undertook in April 2023, again in April 2024, and which we are going to be undertaking again in April 2026 to see if matters have changed any. 35,000 or thereabouts respondents from various NHS organisations up and down the country. And you can see the stats showed that broadly 65% of people are travelling to work by car on their own in any given day. You can also see that women are significantly more likely to drive to work than men, which is important because 75% of the staff who work within the NHS are women. And you can also see there that men are significantly more likely to cycle to work than women. We asked 3 further questions in this People Pulse. The second was about how far people are travelling to work. But the third was, what would encourage you to walk or cycle to work? And if you already walk or cycle to work, what would encourage you to do this more regularly? And you can see that a whacking 61.3% said, nothing would encourage me to walk or cycle to work. Now, okay, that's all right, because actually there's going to be a significant proportion of people who work in the NHS who can't walk or cycle to work because they live too far away, or they have other things on their plate that they have to deal with within the course of the day that make it difficult. So what we want to do, and what we are doing, is focusing on the key reasons or the key interventions that people believe would encourage them to do more of this. And you can see of those top 2 interventions, NHS Trust can improve facilities to make things better. So for instance, by providing staff lockers, showers, changing facilities. But on the other one, there's a lot of work required with local transport and local highway authorities to improve matters, so making cycle routes better and what have you. And the 4th question we asked was same again, but for public transport. You can see that the number for nothing is reduced slightly, in that it's just north of 50% of people said nothing. Again, some of those people may be people who could not access public transport for one reason or another. Maybe they're working shift. Maybe the times of the public transport doesn't suit them. Maybe they're doing drop-offs. Maybe there just isn't a bus or train route where they live. But again, we try to drive into the interventions that would encourage people to use public transport more often. And certainly service improvements is a key part of that. So when we talk about supporting sustainable travel, there are a few key things And these aren't rocket science, but God knows they don't happen often enough. So these are just a few public transport examples of places where good things are happening. And some of these are really basic things, but they don't happen often enough. So this is in Northampton. And I'm suspecting that it was a product of COVID very much, here for the NHS, lots of pan clapping and what have you. Remember that? This is really useful because actually when you're in Northampton bus station, this is the stand that all of the buses to the hospital know straight away. That's there. This I'll come back to in a minute, but this is Leicester's hospital hopper. And this one is very simple and is replicated across the country in various places. But again, it should be, in my view, universal. It's a real-time display that shows bus and train times in real time. That happens to be at Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, but it's in the main entrance. There's a seating area opposite. If it's raining, as it is today, you can sit and you can wait in comfort rather than heading straight out. In Leicester, as I mentioned just a moment ago, they took the bold decision to commission a bus service themselves. Now, I'm not saying this is right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying this is something that they deployed in the Leicester area because of a gap in provision on the part of the general commercial provided bus network, and because the local authority didn't have the money to provide a attended service. They have 3 hospitals, the Glenfield in the west, the Leicester Royal in the centre, and then the Leicester General here in the east. And that service connects those 3 hospitals and some other peripheral areas with a half-hourly service operated using electric buses. Staff can use that service to travel between the sites for free. And they offset the cost of running that service by allowing the general public to use it. And why not? So the general public can use the service. They pay a fare. Also, university students use the service as well. They travel for free, but the university again pays the hospital. So it's been great for Leicester, and usage grows period on period. Whoops, gone the wrong way. There you are. There's a little indication of how the patronage has grown in the last couple of years. And the other thing that is really good about this service is that what the hospital trust did was that they identified that not only was parking a huge problem at all 3 of their sites, and particularly in the city centre site, but they also established that they were forking out a huge sum on providing taxi links for patients and staff to get from one site to another. When they introduced this bus service, they said, no more taxis. You cannot claim a taxi back to get from site to site. You use the bus. So they've saved in that regard as well. And if you want a parking permit, you can have a parking permit, but only for one of the sites. And if you have to travel between the sites, you have to use the bus. Another example, this is more on Park and Ride. So this is Colchester. Colchester have gone hard working with the county council on the Park and Ride scheme there. They've reduced the size and scale of their car parking on site. If you imagine in your mind's eye your local hospital, you think about how constrained a lot of hospital sites are. If you can get the parking off the site, then you can free the space up for clinical purposes. And that's exactly what Colchester are doing. And they provide discounted parking for discounted bus travel for patients as well. And this is another example in Hull, where they've seen sustained modal shift over the last 3 years. So they've undertaken travel surveys 22, 23, 24. This is the level of driving, single occupancy car use in 2022, which stood at 72%. dropped to 59% and has stabilised at 61% in 2024. How have they achieved that? Well, one of the ways that they've achieved that is enhancing the bus services, providing a park and ride, and actually in a slightly unusual move, they've worked with some of their local supermarkets who had additional space in their car parks to say, could our staff have some permits to park in your car park? And the benefits of the supermarket, obviously, is that the staff after work will come and get their dinner. So it makes perfect sense, really. They also doubled down on some of the parking situations on their trust sites as well. So introducing tighter parking permits, more rigidly applied, such that you've got that push and pull. And I think in reality, if you don't have push and pull, you won't achieve the modal shift that we all want to see. In terms of measures, moving on, thinking about parking directly, there's more that NHS trusts and indeed anyone who wants to plan their transport efficiently can do to make things better. This is a very basic variable messaging sign, again at Northampton General Hospital, but what it does is it stops patients going to specific areas and driving round and round and round and round, looking for car parking space where they will never find it, and directs them instead to the car parks where there is some space. And this one, it seems simple and it seems obvious. This is in Barnsley. And parking permits in the NHS are quite often very basic. They're a sticker in the window. But we've moved on from that, haven't we? Technology, surely in the world of AI, in the land of AI, we should be able to do something a bit more intelligent to better utilise our resource. And Barnsley, having gone electronic with their parking permits, that's just a few of the different options that they provide. What does that mean? It's beneficial for the staff and the union, because the staff and the unions can see, oh, well, actually, you're not charging me for something I'm never going to use. If I'm an on-call member of staff, then I can get an on-call permit and I'm not having to buy something I don't use. But equally, it means that the trust know when the car parking space is going to be taken up. And it also means that if you've got a permit, you'll get a space. Because what do we hate most? It's paying for something that we can't get, right? When we talk about active travel and sustainable travel, I won't spend too long on this, but there are plentiful examples of this. This is bike marking in the East Riding. This is free cycle maintenance, Dr. Bike. This is in Ipswich. And what is good about this, and what I'd love to see everywhere really, is that Dr. Bike happens every week. It's not come along on this Thursday in June and we'll provide you with Dr. Bike. And then you get there and they say, oh no, sorry, we're fully booked. When are you here next? We're not. It was just today. Sorry. So this guy comes every week, and the way he makes a bit of money is that he provides the basic cycle maintenance for free. But if you want a full service, you can have one, but you pay for it. But of course, because you're at work and he does it at work when you're there, it's super convenient. And this looks like a bit of a random picture. I know it's a bench, but you can't underestimate the importance of providing the basics on sites. People have mobility needs and mobility issues, and providing them with a bench, a simple bench or benches, is really helpful and can encourage people to walk. Infrastructure. For those of you in the room and online that are watching, who are perhaps some local planning authorities, I want to say something a little bit controversial now that might get me into trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway because I care. This on the left is from North Manchester Hospital, and it's a cycle parking hub. It's a secure cycle parking hub that has shower facilities, maintenance facilities, a drying room, lockers, the lot. You need it, it's there, and it's very high quality. The reason that is there is that that cycle hub sits within a relatively new multi-storey car park at North Manchester Hospital. The reason that cycle hub was included within the design of that hospital multi-storey car park was because it was a planning condition of the local authority. If the local authority says you have to do this, then it will be done. If the local authority doesn't include it or doesn't view it as important, maybe it will be value engineered out of any scheme, because we all know that the NHS faces huge pressures financially. But if it's to be a priority, there's a role for us all to play, not just the NHS. The middle picture is showing you a very well used cycle shed from the Northern General Hospital. And the reason this is so well used is because the cycle shed has been put in the right place. Hasn't been put round by the bins where someone could find a bit of scrub of land to put it in. It's been put right outside the main entrance where all of the staff come into. And guess what? It's well used. Who'd have thought it? And the third picture there is from Bury St Edmunds, West Suffolk Hospital. And it's showing you where the bus comes straight up to drop you off on site, relatively near to the front door. And the first picture on the very beginning, if you remember that ramp that was going up to the, oh, something weird's happened with the sound, sorry. If you remember that ramp that was going up to the main entrance, that's just round the corner from there. So providing access on sites and for public transport and putting things in the right place. I think I've broken it. No, there we are. Briefly, when we talk about active travel, there's another reason why we should really talk about active travel, and that's because actually we really need to get people active. In terms of the global burden of disease and disability adjusted life years. So these are all possible illnesses that will get you, but we can see physical inactivity and low physical inactivity, or low physical activity, is pretty high up on the list. And here, just a little bit further down, ambient particulate matter pollution is causing a lot of problems in terms of illnesses and that people will suffer from. With the NHS, right, this should be front and centre of what we're doing. Unfortunately, Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, agrees. And I love this graph because what that's telling you is that doing the biggest benefit is going from no exercise to a bit of exercise. And there are far too many people who are doing not enough exercise. In fact, whilst this is painting a positive picture, really, in that 75% of people are doing a lot of exercise, still a whacking 25.8% of people are doing less than an average of 30 minutes of exercise a week. That's quite stark. In fact, it's very stark and doesn't benefit the NHS any in terms of us delivering care. I just want to finish, and I am drawing to a close now. Put yourself in their shoes. If you're walking, is there a bench? If you're cycling, are you presented with that as you're asked to cross the on-slip road of the M621 near Salford Hospital? That's a bit geeky, isn't it? Sorry. And consider this as well. If you're on, so the NHS is very banded, very regimented. It's almost like the military in terms of pay grades. So the lowest bands are band 2, band 3, band 4. You go up from there. Now, people on band 2, band 3, etc., can't qualify for salary sacrifice to get tax incentives for bikes or cars or laptops or whatever. So in Basildon, we work with Essex County Council on a scheme called Pedal Power, which I'm very passionate about personally, because it's targeted at those people who are the lowest paid within the organisation, and it gives them a free bike. It loans them the bike for the first 6 months. The bike is tracked. They agree to have trackers on the bike to see if they're using them, to see whether it's been effective. And if they use them, and if they want to keep them after that 6 months, the bike is theirs. And the bike costs about 250 quid, by the way. And they're provided with training, they're provided with helmet and locks, and they're provided with Dr. Bike as well, so for maintenance. So this is the sort of example of a thing that you can give to someone to help them to get active. So opportunities within the NHS. We have a Step Up a Gear network and best practice sharing network, as I say, which now has about 130 trusts in it. We work carefully and closely with Active Travel England, with local authorities and with transport operators to make sure that we improve matters, not just on hospital sites, but beyond hospital sites. We provide supporting information, it says to build your strategy, but to build NHS strategies. And these are so this is our future NHS intranet site, and we have a whole heap of information that we provide to our peers. And coming up is the Sustainable Travel Strategy guidance by February of next year. So take homes. By the way, that's the multi-storey car park that I told you about. That's the North Manchester, and this is the hub part of it for the cycles, and this is the cars bit. Okay. In terms of take homes, the NHS is not impenetrable. I think a lot of people struggle to know where to start with the NHS and how to talk to the NHS. It's not impenetrable. It's just full of very busy people. And that's the reality, with a lot of competing priorities, not full of transport experts. Local authorities shouldn't expect NHS organisations to have all of the answers and the expertise. And as I said, if planners want to come to that party and have that discussion, then they should, and they shouldn't be afraid to do that. And I guess in terms of shifting the dial, thinking about all of us here as transport planners, what levers can we pull? How can we make that little bit of difference? There's the 10-year plan, which focuses on hospital to community, analog to digital, sickness to prevention, and that is what senior leadership within the NHS will be looking at. Thank you very much.
Right, well, thank you, Andrew. So I suppose at this point, I will ask for questions from the floor. Do we have also questions that come in online? And if we do, how do we know about them?
Good question. We'll start in the room. I'll try to figure it out.
Okay, so who has a question? We've got some roving microphones. Anybody wish to ask the first question? Right.
Hi there, really interesting presentation. Neil Byers from Nota Bene Consulting. We're working with a local authority on a bike hire scheme at the moment. We're aware of various discounts for various organisations, and if you don't ask, you don't get, similar to the point you made around the cycle hub. Interested to know across the NHS network if there's an awareness of the different types of discounts that might be provided by bike hire schemes, and to just get a bit of a comparison across the country where that information is available, particularly for local authorities that might be thinking and specifying those schemes so they write it into tenders.
That's an excellent question, one that I think is of real import at the moment. So the question was, in case anyone didn't hear, it was specifically around hire bikes And I'm guessing you're referring specifically to public hire bikes on the street. And one of the things that is quite challenging within the NHS, as it is more widely across the country, is the topic of e-bikes. E-bike fires, e-bike thefts, e-bikes, and it is challenging within the NHS, not least because there are concerns about where are you putting these e-bikes and whether they are legitimate or not, concerns about fires, etc. I think that public bike schemes have a really important role to play in terms of supporting and assisting NHS staff, not only to get to work, but to travel for business as well. So in terms of the discounts, there are business to business discounts that are in existence already, most notably in London, but actually also in other parts of the country as well. Manchester is really pushing forward with those. And in across the UK, for instance, Lime Bikes provide a 50% discount to any NHS member of staff wherever Lime Bikes provide services. And the Santander Cycle Scheme in London offers a 50% discount to NHS staff as well. So when we're having dialogue with them in very much the spirit of if you don't ask, you don't get, that's absolutely what we seek to do. The other angle to that, I guess, is Brompton docks. So the folded bikes that they put in lockers, those often are provided at a discount to NHS staff as well. And I would always recommend that work is undertaken to ensure that there are bike docks, if it's a dock bike system like here in Leeds, or you know, an area where bikes can sensibly be left in the proximity of a hospital and not 5 miles away. I was really pleased actually that in the West Midlands, they've gone out to tender for their bike hire scheme. And one of the things that I found a real shortcoming, and I couldn't really understand why it happened, was that their previous bike hire didn't include where Midland Metropolitan Hospital, which is a brand new urgent care hospital, was built, was literally just outside the barrier, the zone for these bikes. So I found myself turning up to New Street Station thinking, oh, nice sunny day, I'll get on a hire bike, cycling up out the canal, and then realizing, because it's a docked scheme, that I have nowhere to put it, cycling it back into the zone, locking it up, and then walking back to the hospital, which is, so some of that joined upness, particularly when you're talking about a new hospital, needs to be thought through. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, Tim. I've got a question about joined upness as well. So here in Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust is a bus operator. It operates a shuttle bus that links LGI with Jimmy's and the station and various other places. At the same time, West Yorkshire Combined Authority is moving to a bus franchised situation where it can specify routes, etc., etc. But it's how do we get to a position where these teaching hospital trust thinks here's an opportunity for us to stop being a bus operator, and West Yorkshire Combined Authority thinks, well, here's an opportunity to get better value out of what we're currently trying to franchise, and get these folk to talk to each other to the mutual benefit.
Absolutely, and that's the kind of, yeah, that is very challenging, and that is repeated up and down the country. There is a hospital shuttle bus very akin to that in Newcastle that links their two major sites together, and often these are born out of history, so they're provided because they've always been provided. And yeah, absolutely, there are public services quite often that could be pressed into use instead of those private and closed services. Sometimes it is sensible for the NHS to provide its own public transport services. I'll give you an example. At Bristol Royal Infirmary, there is, I think they have something like 140 parking spaces on their site. It's really constrained. Sorry, that's for public and staff. It's tiny. So what they do is they have an arrangement with a shopping centre that is not too far away, but it's far enough away. And basically staff and patients can park there, but the staff pay for the benefit of that parking. Where the rub comes, or where the challenge comes, is that staff who are given discounted parking for their out of hours, so they work, night times and what have you, there was a concern, particularly amongst women, about walking from the hospital into a multi-storey car park, up the multi-storey car park and what have you. So the trust provides a DRT, demand responsive transport service, that takes staff to their car, sees them get into their car, and then watches and waits until they've gone out of the car park. So there are examples where actually it makes sense for a trust to provide ad hoc, discrete services. But in the main, absolutely, I would love to see West Yorkshire Combined Authority and Leeds teaching hospitals get into bed with each other and sort that out, particularly as a former employee of West Yorkshire Combined Authority. I also think that there's something there around park and ride, that the Leeds Park and Ride system is not utilised as well as it could be to the benefit of staff who work at St Jimmy's specifically, but also actually LGI, because it doesn't go past the front door of LGI, and I think one of the routes probably could and should. Thanks.
I some questions about this time the distance and time distribution of car commuters, because that'll affect the sort of mode switchability. If it's so, I'd like to know, is it generally, say, within 30 minutes local commuting, and how much of it is quite long distance intercity, in which case the long distance train would be the appropriate response?
Yeah, great question. So the question for those that maybe didn't hear is about the length of time that people, or the distribution of people travelling to hospital settings. And I'm going to address this from a staff perspective, but actually I think there's a patient piece into the mix here as well. So from a staff perspective, and a significant number of people will travel a very short distance to get to work, and slightly inevitably, the more you are paid, the further you are traveling, by and large. That's what we see within the NHS. And in terms of parking tools or parking permits, a significant number of hospitals do have a limit on parking permits. So they say, either crudely, under a certain distance, you don't qualify for a parking permit, or actually a number of trusts are a little bit more intelligent about it and will say, well, actually, there's a number of different things going on here in terms of whether you're entitled to a parking permit. So have you got a good bus service, or have you not got a good bus service? Have you got a good cycle link? Have you got good footways, etc.? So there are some trusts who are very progressive and are looking at that to try and better control and better manage their parking stock to ensure that those people who really need the parking spaces can get them. In terms of patients, just coming back to that, there are some hospitals that have patients that come a heck of a distance to get treatment, a heck of a distance, particularly major trauma centres or specialist centres, children's hospitals and the like. You've got people trekking halfway across the country to get to their appointment. And that's one of the reasons why I do want to make abundantly clear that I don't think that parking is a bad thing. Parking really isn't a bad thing. It's about the availability of parking for the people who need it. and being more clever, more intelligent about how we make that parking available. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So also in terms of day and night shift. So how many, and obviously there's no buses running at night, but you do have your car parking spaces. So I was just wondering what's the split in terms of hours that NHS workers spend working day and night shift?
Oh, the overwhelming majority of NHS staff are working daytime. That's that, you know, and in terms of any treatment, that's happening in the daytime, except for emergency care. So, you know, if you go to your average hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'll see parking everywhere. There's plentiful parking. And indeed, people who are working night shifts qualify for free parking because we recognise that, you know, there are no alternatives for them.
Okay, so before anyone else, I have a question.
Go for it.
I was going to ask. So a lot of us in this room, we either work for local authorities or we advise local authorities as consultants. And one thing that I was really struck by is there were, within your talk, there were lots and lots of, well, local authorities and the NHS have a lot of overlaps. We've got public health duties, decongestion, net zero objectives, and neither body has much money. So I was very struck in your presentation about lots of the very practical and actually quite low cost things that can be done. So what sorts of things should local or can local authorities do relatively easily to help?
That's a really, yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, Julian, that where I would start is to say that local authorities should be thinking about their healthcare settings in their plans. I've seen far too many local transport plans or local cycle and walking infrastructure plans, LC WIPs as they're called, which don't touch the hospital, let alone consider GP surgeries. It's fundamental that if the NHS is the biggest employer in an area, failing to plan is planning to fail. Also, I would suggest that working with NHS trusts on their parking, on their access, and on considering how you can help, how a local authority can help to get parking off-site potentially, particularly for staff, is a really key ingredient of what can be done. And I think local authorities, sometimes they have no land, sometimes they have lots of land. They vary just as NHS trusts do. But I do think that there is a greater amount of collaboration that could be looked at in that particular space. Also in terms of, so what I love in the NHS actually is, and I love going seeing things on the shop floor because it's fantastic and it's inspiring, really inspiring when I get to go out and about, which I probably do more often than my boss would like, but it is inspiring. And what I really love is when NHS services, either in a community diagnostic centre, so CT scanners, X-rays or what have you, are put in areas that people can reach them. And there's a great example in Greater Manchester, in Altrincham, where there's a town centre redevelopment that's happened there, where some of the services have been moved from the hospital and they're in the town centre. And that's the sort of thing, again, coming back to planning, coming back to regeneration of our towns. If you think about some of the towns in this region that have suffered, you know, people say quite regularly that, sorry, I'm going to quote a particular place, is that bad? Keighley died when it lost its M&S. You know, it's that sort of town that will really benefit from having NHS services put in the heart of the town, because it's a reason for people to travel in. And if they travel in for their NHS appointment, you know, guess what? They'll probably be going to the shops as well.
Cool, thank you very much. Okay, so more questions. I see there are a number of hands for this lady on the front row.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Oh, sorry. Hello.
Say who
Thanks,
you are.
Andrew. I was interested in your slide that showed that even with incentives, 50% of your NHS employees are not interested in using public transport. 50% of, I'm not sure what the 50% was of, but anyway, there were 50% who wouldn't use public transport even where there were incentives. And I remember hearing, I think you talked about some years ago, a scheme whereby staff, first of all, why is that? Do we know more about why, understand that a bit more? And secondly, I remember a scheme whereby it might even have been in Leeds. When a new facility was built, the staff were initially given bus passes, free bus passes for the first 1 to 3 months. And I'd be interested to know if there was a follow-up to see how many of the staff continued to use the bus passes when the free period was up. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of public transport and bus use, I think if you ask the question of a person who drives to work, and all things being equal, no increase in car parking, they get to keep their car parking permit, why wouldn't they? So unless you're doing something that makes it more difficult for them in some ways, not that we're trying to make staff's lives difficult, but you know, unless you're doing something that moves the goalposts a little bit, that's why 50% will say no, thank you, I'm happy in my car and I'll stick with it. Notwithstanding, as I said earlier, that a significant proportion of people working for the NHS won't have an alternative because the buses don't run or they don't run to their home, etc. Picking up on the second point you raised, the example I think you're looking at is, or we're thinking about, was in York. And what they did was they introduced new parking permits. So they scrapped all of their old parking permits, introduced a new system. It was more tightly monitored and regimented. And at the same time as they did that, they gave staff free bus use in York. And they did that for about 4 months and usage shot up. They then reduced that to a 50% discount. Usage dropped a little bit, but then actually leveled out again. Not quite as high as it had been, but definitely not as low as it was before the start. So I think inevitably when you do something like that, you reach a bit of a happy medium. And sorry, there was just something else that I thought of in response to your last question, Julian, and that is neighbourhood forums and the role that the NHS plays in its wider community, and particularly thinking about residential areas around hospitals. There's a great example of the Christie Cancer Hospital in Greater Manchester, where when they built on a bit of their car park and put a new unit in there, a lot of staff inevitably started parking on the local streets. The residents were up in arms, and it had the terrible impact of local residents not being very supportive of their local cancer hospital, which is obviously not, no one wants that. But the senior management of the hospital trust got involved with the local councillors, and they have a local area forum that meets quarterly now to try and manage that better. And it's been really positive, both for the local area and for the hospital as well. So I think there is something about that, getting your democratic officials involved in the process and them showing an interest in the NHS settings.
I think we've got time for 2 or 3 more questions.
Hi, thank you very much for a really interesting talk. It strikes me, talking about bus provision at hospitals, that there is a sort of tension between the priorities of providing an efficient service that's sort of fast and can get staff to the hospital with minimal travel times to encourage modal shift, and providing services that have a kind of wide coverage that stop round every corner and allow patients with mobility needs who can't afford to drive or take a taxi and to get to the hospital easily. So I was wondering what you thought about this tension in bus planning and how you address this, in your role.
I think firstly, it was ever thus, the tension between the commercially viable quick service and the socially necessary, you hope that the bus is going to go this way, and then, oh no, it's off up this, and then it's back this way. And, you know, it serves every residential street in a town. And you're thinking, am I ever going to get to where I need to get to? And that's no different for the NHS than it is for any other employer, any other business going. There's something for me about the fact that so many bus services are still very radial in nature. They are going from out here to in there into the city centre, and that makes, to take an example from this region, Bradford, that the way that the bus network is shaped in Bradford doesn't suit the Royal Infirmary very well. It's quite tricky to get to, and by and large, if you're coming from pretty much anywhere by bus in Bradford, you've got to go into the interchange, change, and then come out again. So even though the bus, when you're on it, is relatively fast, it's got that tricky situation in it. And that's why I think, back to Neil's point, I think there is something about sometimes, and thinking about the Leicester example, sometimes the NHS needs to be a bit selfish and say, actually, we're putting ourselves first. And that's probably actually thinking about your point. That is why they do put themselves first, because what's the alternative? The alternative is staff having to go round the houses once an hour on a bus service that might get them to their appointments or might not. So there is that tension. I think you're absolutely right. I'm really interested to see how some of the work that's going on in Greater Manchester at the moment will change some of that potentially. And we're in a brave new world, aren't we? So we watch and wait with interest.
Yes, I think just to add my perspective, bus planning point, hospitals can often be a bit tricky because they're near the city centre, but not necessarily in it. And it's how you provide, good examples in Leeds with LGI and Jimmy's are, they are near the city centre. In Jimmy's case, it's actually a mile or so away, and it's how you provide those partly radial links out, and it can be quite challenging. Okay, so I think we've got time for one more question. Graham.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just a question about, I think trusts have to update their strategic transport plans next year. So I was interested just in the process and what you are hoping for, aspiring for within those plans.
But I'm glad you asked that question. As I said earlier in the comments, all of the NHS organisations have had to produce green plans, and they've had to update those green plans. And for the benefit of those who are not familiar with this, that's a green plan that covers all elements of sustainability, not just travel and transport. So often the travel and transport section is quite short, quite general, and not necessarily as specific as it might be. The key thing that we want to see coming through in these sustainable travel plans is an action plan that has got leadership from the top and that has got, if not the funding secured, an idea as to how the interventions that are going to be taken forward are funded. And then finally, that it's evidence-based. So what surveys, what knowledge is being gathered to shape the measures that are being implemented. And I think just in your final point, as I showed with the bench, some of this stuff doesn't need to be super sexy, super expensive. Some of it is just about getting the basics right.
Right, well, that note, thank you all very much. We just thank Andrew again. So on the other side of the black door, we still have some drinks left, I think. So I think we can be here till 8 o'clock. Yeah. Is that right, Tim? So yeah, there's an opportunity for a bit of informal networking. And if anybody wants to put any questions to Andrew or any of the rest of us, feel free. I will just finish up by doing a plug for the wonderful Transport Planning Society. If you are not a member and you've enjoyed this event, or indeed the previous event that we had in September, please consider joining. It's a wonderful society which is helping to develop the profession, which is something that it sorely needs for the challenges of the 21st century. So thank you very much.
Oh, and Julian, if you want to give feedback on this event, not on is Andrew any good or not, but on the events in general, then please do snap the QR code. Down there and turn right after those double doors.
Well, thank you all very much.